Social Protest and Affirmation Part 2. We're looking at Göring the Executioner here. So, John Hartfeld, who was born in Germany, and he was Helmut Herzfelde, and he changed his name. Herz means heart, Feld is field. So, he changed his name, he anglicized it, and went to England during the duration of World War II because of his protests. This is an amazingly strong image, and I think really communicates very clearly the precedent that the Nazis are starting to set in Germany. And what we're looking at is the burning of the Reichstag behind us here. And this had been the seat of power, kind of like the parliament or, the White House you would think of in other countries. But that has one photo behind here. This is a photo montage, okay? And he's kind of starting this way of working, and the Dadaists do this as well. But what he's doing, it's kind of surrealism, but it's also kind of realistic as well, in the sense that he's commenting on, he has a direct message, in other words. He's not kind of making up a dreamlike sequence. He has a direct message here to explain that this guy, this general, the Field Marshal Hermann Göring of the Nazi Party, is a bloodthirsty maniac, which in truth he was. So he prints this in a Prague newspaper, and really the bloodshed had not started for World War II. World War II officially starts in 1939, so this is 6 years earlier. But he's warning people, and he was very prophetic in this, that he was exposing the horrors of Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany, they were in power in terms of politically before they became more militaristic. They had something called brown shirts, these guys that would kind of go around and beat up people who were promoting communism or democracy. Those two things were against fascism, which is what Nazism is. Okay, if that makes sense. A little complicated. A lot of terms that we used or were used at that time have changed in meaning a little bit in the modern day. But there was a lot of fear of communism spreading. Already Russia had become communist. The Russian Revolution had happened in the teens, so Europe was fighting out what kind of a government they were going to have. The kings and queens were fading away. Like I'd mentioned, the Kaiser is no longer in power. At any rate, the idea of the Reichstag burning, they think that this is how the Nazis came to power, because the Reichstag burned, and they said it was a terrorist attack, but in fact it was probably, and I think it was found out to have actually been the Nazis. So this portrayal, this way that he changed the photo of Göring, he thickened his neck, making him look more aggressive and like a bully that he really is inside. He's responsible for many deaths, millions of people. Burning of the Reichstag, likely perpetrated by the Nazis. Black and white elements, again, give it a more blunt, in-your-face sort of quality. And the meat cleaver and the stained apron, warning of Nazi bloodshed. It already kind of started, like I say, even in the teens and 20s, there was a lot of brutality from the Nazis, and they slowly gained power. You have to remember, in the context of Europe, and specifically Germany, a lot of poverty, a lot of hunger. We're in the Depression, which was worldwide in the Western world. A lot of people starving, and they were looking around for a solution, and unfortunately they gave credence and power to the Nazis, and that's how they got their start. Okay, so David Alfaro Siqueiros, Echo of a Scream, and Pablo Picasso's Guernica. We are in the New World here. We are in Mexico here, and we're in the Old World here, Spain / Picasso's actually in France when he paints this portrait. They're both quite extreme. Remember, they're reacting to the same thing, not specifically Guernica so much with Siqueiros, but with the Spanish republic fighting the Nazis. So there were a lot of other people that were just backed by the Nazis, and then some of the Nazis fought against the Spanish. In this piece, again, the Spanish Civil War prior, one of the precursors to World War II, sort of went straight into it if you look at the date, 1937. And there were a fair amount of Americans that went on their own. We weren't officially involved in the Spanish um, Civil War, but there were a lot of Americans, and you read about Hemingway went as a soldier himself, the writer Hemingway. A lot of other people went to support the Spanish, but they were unsuccessful. And yeah, so anyway, this is a Mexican artist, and he's painting this particular piece, and this is sort of again, surrealistic style, where you have this giant head amidst this other broken material, and sort of a realistic scale landscape, so the scale of the head is giant, and there's a smaller baby. I think this is really interesting because a child's cry of this size of a child does seem this large. So what he's trying to depict here is the pain from the unseen victims and how large it is, if that makes sense. And then also the helplessness of children in this situation. And as we know from Guernica, the actual town that was bombed, a lot of children and women and innocent people were killed. That's almost, that there were no soldiers, there was no war fighting there. They were unsuspecting. The Nazis dropped the bombs on them without any warning whatsoever, just devastated the town. So that's part of that. Also, this other component, the urbanization, industrialization, and endless piles of waste. So the Industrial Revolution at this point into the early 20th century is starting to pile up in terms of junkyards and things like that we never had before. We never had trash piles on the level of we do now. And the Industrial Revolution in some ways is responsible for all this upheaval. Actually, in many ways responsible for all this upheaval in the 20th century. Industrial Revolution starts mid 1800s, and everybody thinks it's great. We're doing all these mechanized things, but the level of noise and waste and use of metal, and you can kind of see this as sort of metallic looking gun barrels and pieces here. There's all this stuff now in the world, and then it gets tossed out. And that's partly, if you go back to Picasso's collage using newspaper, that was a commentary on that as well, because the daily newspapers, or even sometimes newspapers, were 2 and 3 times a day. They used to have an evening edition. This is before we had news media on television or radio, before pre-radio, pre-television, pre-internet. So there's tons of newspapers around. So Picasso's starting to use newspaper in his artwork, commenting on the detritus, the junk left over. Okay, so that's part of it as well. And so he fought in Spain against the fascists, but again unsuccessful. But a very powerful piece of art. Another piece that has to do with the Spanish Republic, the Elegy to the Spanish Republic from Robert Motherwell. Now this gets us into abstract expressionism. We're here in Surrealism in 1937. This is similar in terms of stylistically to Frida Kahlo. You can think about her. And also magic realism, which existed in Mexico, which is slightly different than Surrealism. It just means that dream state is sort of happening while you're awake, if that makes sense. So that imagery of having sort of ghosts around you and you can see them, that's magic realism. Surrealism is interpreting dreams, if that, just to simplify. Okay, so Motherwell, we're going to get into some edgy topics here. So this piece is abstract expressionist, big areas of paint. It's not color-filled painting, but it's pretty close. So the idea of abstract expressionism, we're starting to get into paint for paint's sake, and this is almost 20 years later, mid-century in the post-war, okay? Starts during World War II, but post-war is when abstract expressionist really gains some momentum, and it takes over most of the rest of the 20th century. And then there's reactions to it later. But at any rate, what it was believed is it universally communicates through these paint strokes, okay? So whatever intention he puts in while he's painting, if he's thinking about something while he pushes this paint around on the canvas, then you're going to pick that up emotionally, if that makes sense to you. So it universally communicates struggle between life and death, freedom and oppression. Whatever he's putting in there, he doesn't need to draw soldiers, in other words. He doesn't need to draw suffering. He's going to draw these strokes and you're going to understand what he's saying, okay? What he is telling us, or what other art critics have told us, is that he was influenced by the surrealist process called automatism, which it's about intuition and spontaneity, and that it's in the work while you're making it, and you should make work as fast as you possibly can in terms of expressing it directly out of yourself so that you get that spontaneity in there, and that also embracing the accidental. We call it the happy accident in the art world, where you're just starting to come up with these things and you're just kind of, pushing paint around, you're putting some colors up, and the truth will come out just, accidentally or, intentionally. All right, so the black and white form suggests bull testicles, which the bull is the symbol for Spain. Not to give too much away about Guernica, but you see the bull getting attacked, but the bull testicles are being smashed. So the manhood or the strength or the, how do you want to say, the procreative nature of the bull in Spain is being crushed. So Spain is being crushed in this Spanish Civil War. Got it? So leather berets of the Guardia Civil. If you think of Che Guevara, you can probably bring that image up pretty well. It kind of looks like those berets, if that makes sense. So that's also the leather berets of the Guardia Civil, and then the living forms are being crushed by the black bands. Okay.